Welcome. Breakfast Extra here, and in a distressing event highlighting the persistent safety challenges in Lagos State, a building under construction recently collapsed, leading to the tragic loss of 5 lives and leaving several others injured. This incident underscores the urgent need for stricter safety measures in Nigeria's construction industry, particularly as Lagos continues to experience rapid urbanization. The state's growing population and housing demands often pressure builders to cut corners, leading to catastrophic consequences. In response to this tragedy, the Lagos state government has swiftly implemented a ban on overnight sleeping at construction sites, a common practice that has posed significant risks to workers' safety.
And now the ban is part of a broader effort to enhance safety protocols and prevent further disasters, aiming to ensure that construction companies adhere to proper building standards. However, this policy also raises concerns about enforcement and the socioeconomic implications for laborers who rely on temporal shelter at these sites. The incident has also sparked a broader conversation about the need for comprehensive reform in the construction sector, as well as greater oversight and accountability from both government and private entity. Now, before we get into the discussion for this morning, our correspondent, Benard Akede, was at the site, or the building collapse site, from earlier this week in Maryland, Lagos. And here is his report.
This wreckage is all that is left of the 2-story building which stood here in Wilson Mba Street. The building, which was still under construction, had some construction workers in it when it came down. 5 people were rescued and are currently being looked after at the Gbagada General Hospital. But sadly, another 5 male corpses were pulled out of the wreckage.
A lot of our people are still not following the building codes of the state government. We're still doing search and rescue to see if there are other lives that are present, and of course, we will switch immediately to ground zero operations. Part of this building unit of it, or part of the reinforcement, the concrete, will have to be taken to material testing. So that would determine, of course, what really is the cause of the incident.
One of the residents who lives next to the collapsed building explained what she heard just before the building came down.
I can't tell you what really happened because it was already like around past 1 in the night. I heard the noise of a neighbor shouting, "Lamp, lamp, lamp, lamp." That was when I woke up. That what happened. So when I came outside, I saw that the building was already collapsed. I can't say much about the building, but I only saw every day they walk there, overnight time, morning, evening. That's what I can say about the building.
Some of the buildings in the area that are affected by the swampy nature of the terrain have previously been marked as distressed by the authorities. Just behind the street where this building came crashing down is an entire stretch of swampy land, marshy ground basically, where there's a lot of water, and these kind of areas are prone to flooding, especially now during the rainy season. Even as the excavator is working here, we can feel the ground bouncing, almost like there's water underneath the sand filling here. And no surprise that one of the LASEMA agents here who was working told us off camera though that he would not be surprised to find out that it was because of the topography of the area, how swampy this place is, that may have been one of the causes or the major cause of this building collapsing here. While the owner of the collapsed structure or the contractor in charge are yet to be identified, officials of the Lagos State Building Control Agency have said they will carry out integrity tests on the other structures close to the collapsed building, and if found unworthy, those buildings too will be pulled down. In Lagos for News Central, I'm Benard Akede.
And that was Benard Akede there, News Central correspondent, live at the site that collapsed over this week in Arowojobe, Maryland, Lagos. And he joins us live to provide deeper insight into this story and also to talk more about the menace that is building collapse in Lagos. Benard, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me. Good morning.
Morning, Bennett.
I mean, a very horrible sight there that we saw, and also our heart goes out to the family of those who lost their life. But I'd like for you to pretty much describe the scene of the collapse. And you also made mention about the topography of that area as well, which is Maryland. But again, to the sites, the responses from the emergency services and a bit more on the area.
All right, so clearly, as I mentioned earlier, the site is quite it's a swampy area, very waterlogged, very, marshy ground, so to speak. For those who know Maryland, you know that deep down inside Maryland, down Mede, especially that Arrow job, on arriving in that area, anyway, there's even a bridge that's under construction. But then we got to see and we got to notice that a lot of the houses there, well, some of the houses there are already sinking, right? Many of the compounds, they had to be raised with sand filling and concrete. But when you raise when you let me see if I can use my hands to describe. If you build a house and the ground level is like this, by the time you raise the ground, it goes this way, and then the house itself is a bit low, but the ground has come up, And we did get to see some buildings there that, as I mentioned, had already started sinking. Some had flood waters already in the compound, and some compounds were marked distressed, as I mentioned, and some even abandoned, as a matter of fact. So when we got there, one of the LASEMA agents who was working and refused to speak on camera said he really would not be surprised if it is as a result of the topography of the area and the flooding, the continuous flooding, particularly during the rainy season, that made the uncompleted building very weak, made the structures weak, and they made it collapse. That's one. Secondly, one of the neighbors there complained about building materials, and I know we've heard this, one time too many. However, she blamed the building materials or the use of substandard building materials to the cost of materials in the market at the moment. And she gave an analogy where a friend had paid contractors money to buy iron rods to build. When the contractor got to the market, the kind of rods, the specification they needed was not available, so they had to buy substandard materials. Unfortunately, that could cause, collapse of buildings as well. And then, as you also mentioned while reading the introduction, people living in uncompleted buildings, that's a conversation that we really need to have. Whether it's the builders who have to live there, probably because of proximity or because that's what they can afford while they are building, or because it's convenient for them during the whole months of building, or it's just destitute who have nowhere to stay. The issue of people living in uncompleted buildings in and around Lagos is definitely a conversation that has to be had. And if it's going to be enforced, then the authorities need to come hard. Just behind my apartment here is an uncompleted building that has been under construction for a couple of months now. And I know for a fact that people live there sometimes. It's a health risk. It's a security risk for the people who live around that construction site. And then for those who are living in it as well, it's another security risk. So there's a whole lot of conversation surrounding collapsed buildings that we need to look at the moment in Lagos.
All right, well, Benard, I'm very curious regarding the area. Now, you did say that it was a residential area. You also talked about the quality of land there and how houses sink. Does it seem like perhaps maybe these areas are being sold off at cheaper rates than other places, and that's why there's a rush for them and there's a rush to build on these lands with inadequate material? Does that seem the case?
Well, when it comes to housing in Lagos or buying of lands or buildings, the word cheap is relative. So even when you say cheap, your cheap might not be my cheap, as I don't know how much you earn, but your cheap might not be my cheap. But well, that could be one of the cases, say because the land is quite marshy, it's waterlogged, or it gets waterlogged when it rains. So it would go for not as expensive as somewhere else you buy that would be solid ground, or as a certain other location, say maybe like Lekki. But again, when it comes to the mainland, Maryland is, so to speak, high end. So it's not exactly cheap. But then, I mean, there are houses already standing there, and it's an estate, Arrow Jobe estate. So I wouldn't say it's exactly cheap. We did see some kind of, choice buildings around there. People had erected certain kind of structures there. Again, because it's Lagos, land is land. So regardless of where you're buying, it will be relatively pricey. But what we came to notice while observing the area was that people already know that this area is waterlogged. So what most of them do is they do heavy sand filling in the area before they build. However, depending on the amount at one's disposal, that will determine the kind of or the amount of sand filling that you can do. And if you do not do proper or heavy sand filling, then unfortunately your building may be heading this way. The fate of your building might just not be too different from what one has seen there. We saw so many buildings there. The area, the lands were sand filled. Some not as much as others, some raised very high, some not as much as others. So for one who's coming to buy land in that area, you can see it that it is waterlogged, and you know that you have a lot of work to do if you want to live safely in that particular environment.
And when people make these choices, it makes me wonder if it's because of the housing deficit that is in Lagos. We understand that it is over about 2.5 million when it comes to housing deficit. So when these construction workers are sleeping at their construction site, which is their workplace in and of itself, and they have no choice, even when you see land poachers, because I know a couple of months ago there was a property that was highly gated and very fenced. I never knew there were poachers living there until when they started to move their things out of the land or the property for the person to start to build a block of flats now. But it's very interesting, and I wonder if that's a housing deficit that causes also these people to go and get cheaper material, cheaper, building materials to build these homes at a very fast rate so that they can put it out and get money and get their loss or their expenses back. But I would like to ask about the construction company that's involved as well. Has there been any statement from the authority regarding the construction company and the owner of this property?
Well, so far, none yet. That was one of the questions I particularly asked the representative of the Lagos State Emergency Management Agency, LASEMA. I asked him categorically, has there been any news from the owner of the property or the company who was contracted, or companies contracted to construct the building? And he said no, that they are not saying that they're going to apprehend or arrest these people, but they just wanted to come forward for questioning so they can know exactly what went into the building, how many people have been working there, the kind of material, they can prove the kind of materials that they have been using to build that particular structure, and other information that will help the investigation. This happened on Thursday, as at Friday evening, I beg your pardon, there has still been no word from the LASEMA office or from the owner of the building or the company who was constructing the building.
Right. Benard, I have to ask about, I know you interviewed one of the residents at that Arowo Jobe as well. Were you able to speak to any of the workers at the site, those who were at the construction site? What was the atmosphere like in the estate?
It was a street, not the street is not so long, something Wilson Mba Street. The residents just stood from a distance and were looking at what was going on. Not many of them wanted to speak, except for that lady who shares a fence with the property that came down. As for the workers, five of the corpses that were pulled out were workers, and the other 5 that were rescued were also workers. So none of them was around. But on our way out, there was a gentleman who came and was in tears. One of the security operatives brought him to sit down, and they started questioning him. They didn't give us a chance to talk to him, but from a distance, he spoke in Yoruba, and I could hear him say that all the people who were there, they knew each other. Some of them came from Ibadan, to come and work there, of course, because they were looking for work, and that is where they've been living and sleeping, which is pretty much, unfortunately, normal when it comes to construction sites. The laborers, more often than not, sleep in those buildings. As for the other neighbors who were there, we did get to hear that first aid relief, so to speak, came from one of the neighbors who's a medical doctor, and it was him who made it possible for some of the lives to be saved. The fear now for the other neighbors, I think, will be the testing of the other structures, testing the integrity of those structures. If those structures don't seem strong enough, then they'll be pulled down. So the question now is, where will they go? Is there any way they can appeal that their buildings don't get pulled down? Is there anything they can do? Because again, you mentioned the housing deficit in Lagos. It's one thing for one to be looking for accommodation. It's another thing for one to be immediately evicted or ejected from the accommodation because it has to be pulled down due to the fact that there was a collapsed building beside it there. So, well, it's, that's the situation, or that was the situation at the time we left there. Not many people were willing to speak except for that lady who shares the fence with the collapsed structure.
Thank you very much, Benard. I was very curious regarding all the other structures on the street, but we are out of time. But thank you very much for bringing us such a fine report, and we do hope that you follow on with the story, and let's see how it develops. Thank you very much again.
Thank you for having me.